Do you have trouble talking about your feelings? You're not alone. It's a topic that can make even the most powerful people somewhat squeamish. You're listening to Feelings Matter, where our mission is to demystify everything about emotions so that we can all get more comfortable talking about them. Join Tina and Michelle every week as we unpack a new angle on emotions, drawing upon the science of the brain and the psychology of human nature.
And I want to start this conversation off by asking you, Tina, why do feelings matter to you professionally?
If I answer something like feelings matter because most often they don't, that doesn't make sense.
Actually, it does. This ties into what I know about you as far as your interest in psychology and your interest in data science, and the fact that we've both had professional experiences in the workplace that really could have been avoided if feelings had mattered more.
Yes, that's for sure. It's a difficult topic for anyone to talk about, let alone in your personal relationships, to just tell your partner you love them, to remember to do that, to express your feelings, to actually stop and think, how does that person feel right now? And we never really do that in the workplace at all. If you look at any kind of employee engagement assessment, it's always asking questions about, does your boss praise you? Or, were you given enough time off? Things that professionals assume matter in job satisfaction, and they do. Mm-hmm. But that's not why people leave jobs. It's not really why people are under stress. A lot of that is emotional. We all are emotional beings. And because we don't really have a way to measure emotion, quantify it, or even really describe it very well, it's really difficult to measure. And so it's avoided.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like particularly in American workplace culture, the expectation is you're going to check all that at the door. That for whatever reason, you're going to leave your emotions, your personal life, all that kind of stuff. You're going to walk into the door, do a job, and walk away. And maybe when the Industrial Revolution first happened in the U.S., and maybe when we were all farm workers in the U.S., that was a possibility. But the nature of work in this country has changed, and therefore the nature of our expectations should have changed along with it.
And what you're speaking about is often what I would refer to as the epitome of professionalism. Let's do your job. Let's not let your emotions get in the way. And what that really is emotional regulation. And that's a learned skill. Mm-hmm. And anyone can learn that. It just takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of awareness of your emotion. But that's kind of the catch-22, because now we're back about having to actually think about our feelings. And kind of gets to the point why it does matter. We have to think about them. They do matter. And if we pay attention to them, it's easier to know that they're affecting us in our interactions and in our decisions, and take the steps that we need to take to do some self-care, do some recovery, take some time away, whatever it is that we need to do to moderate our emotions will allow us to show up at the workplace in a day-to-day basis without them and affecting every little interaction that we have.
I also notice a lot that while we as workers are expected to be professional, check all of that emotional stuff at the door, so much of the job is about communication and dealing with other people's emotions. So a little bit of background on me. I come to this as a communicator, as a marketer. A lot of my job is about emotional connection, whether it's about telling a company's story or whether it's about targeting the right people in the right moment with advertising and marketing messages. There's a lot of emotional consideration that goes into what I do as a professional. And that's where I come at this. I'm not a therapist. I don't have any formal training in psychology other than just like the basic Psych 101 back in college. But as a storyteller and communicator, I've really paid attention to how we make those emotional connections through communication and how we build trust as a company. Those are all psychological things. Those are all things that matter to how we feel. We make a whole lot of business decisions based on a gut reaction. We really do.
Yeah.
The level of, logical thought process, that kind of comes after we've gone, oh, this is the thing I think I like. Now let me evaluate it and make sure that I'm making the right decision. But the initial, I'm going to lean toward making this decision is more emotional than. And so for me as a communicator, as a marketer, this has always mattered to me. Feelings are integral and important to what I do. And so I come at it from there. How about you?
Man, it's really deep for me. This has been a lifelong obsession, quite frankly. I remember being a misunderstood, creative, sensitive, shy little girl and an artist with parents who were scientists, a physics teacher. My dad was a PhD in organic chemistry. So you can imagine there was a bit of a dissonance, a discongruence between each of us. I felt like I was almost punished for showing any emotion. It was the kind of parenting of the baby boomer era where if you cry, you are told not to cry, or I will give you something to cry about, almost a threat. So I never really felt safe showing my emotions. And I also never really understood why I felt like I had so many emotions, like that were overcoming me, that I was then required to just, don't show them because it's not safe. And that actually attitude is pervasive in the workplace. Nobody feels safe to show their emotions for fear of retaliation for good reason. And for me, it's a disservice to everyone. Everyone has emotions. To think that we, don't have them, or that we should suppress them, or that they're good or they're bad. These kinds of topics are things that I've thought about since I was a teenager. I did also go into communication, a graphic designer, an artist. I look at communicating and expressing emotion with color. My first foray into psychology was as a designer and trying to understand what colors to choose for different brands and understanding the color psychology and what colors could evoke different feelings and different meanings. From there, I moved into feeling more interested in how my design or how the thing I was designing was impacting those who were using it, instead of caring as much about what it looked like or what the end product was. And that led me down into a deep user experience path. And that has now led me to getting a master's in industrial organizational psychology, which is kind of like the non-pathological part of psychology. It's at the workplace, and we're dealing a lot more with what I love, which is positive emotions, how to thrive, how to be resilient. What does it mean to be optimistic? What is emotional intelligence? How do you learn about these things? How do you conduct studies? And it's been a game changer for me as a designer to learn how to be a researcher, to learn how to be a social scientist and take design research and research on my users to a whole new level. And that has also led to the development of brand new technology, where it's just as I'm going through this and realizing there are so many things that we could do, and possibly even quantify emotions, which is my lifelong goal.
There are personal levels to this as well. You and I both have personal stories of things that have happened to us that have impacted our emotional well-being. Both of us have children. Mine are adults. Yours are still growing up. So we're at different phases of parenting, and yet we've also kind of had experiences where, now I'm responsible for the emotional growth and well-being of another little human being. And that kind of changes the way I look at this too.
Yeah.
So let's unpick that a little bit so that people understand that this isn't just kind of our day job, but this is something that has always impacted our lives.
Support for this podcast comes from Mindful Appy. Your feelings matter, and Mindful Appy can prove it. Try it out for free right now. Grab your phone and text the emoji that best represents how you feel to 972-480-6715. See how your feelings compare with other listeners of the Feelings Matter podcast. Again, text the emoji to 972-480-6715. And now back to the conversation with Tina and Michelle.
With the kids, especially, as you know, mine are 5 and 8, and they're 2 boys that battle each other, and they're very active and very smart. So these little boys at that age, they're still throwing temper tantrums, quite frankly. They have very, very rudimentary emotional regulation, if any at all. And as you know, your kids, they just know how to push your buttons. And sometimes if they want your attention, they just try to make you mad just to get your attention. More attention, more attention, more attention. It's never enough. Mm-hmm. So I'm at that phase right now. And we have actually resorted to psychology to handle emotions with parenting, which is probably a future podcast topic all in of itself.
I certainly hope so. I'm kind of wishing I had some of these tools in my kit when I was raising mine.
Oh, yes. Well, what we've done, and actually I have my son, my 8-year-old son, to thank for this. When he was, I think, 3 or 4, we still had a nanny watching him who was going back to community college to try to finish her degree, and she was taking a psychology class. I think she was just spending time maybe reading the textbook to my son because he probably found it interesting. And I got home from work and he said, "Mom, this back here, this is your old brain. This is the lizard brain. And this up here, this is your new brain." And I was like, it's a pretty high level concept for what pretty much amounts to a toddler.
Yeah.
So we talked about it a little bit more, and being the nerdy parent that I am, I explained everything about the lizard brain, the origins of flight, fight, or freeze, and being triggered with your amygdala over here, your little almond-shaped amygdalas that get all, fired up when you get in your lizard brain. And then all of a sudden your front brain is no longer in control. So all the things that you say and all the things that you do, they aren't really coming from a good place of well-considered thought or emotional regulation. It's just not possible. So what we did as parents, my husband and I decided to use that as the foundational basis for parenting, which is a temper tantrum, an argument, a disagreement, a desire, whatever it is, it can put somebody in their lizard brain. And when somebody is in their lizard brain, it's an agreement that we have that we stop focusing on the context or the content of what we're arguing about or what we're temper tantruming about. And instead we shift to helping that person get out of their lizard brain. And when they're toddlers, you can simply tickle them and it'll get them out of their lizard brain. I imagine it's a little harder with your kids who are grown adults.
Just a little bit. Yes. So by comparison, I have a 23, a 21, and a 19-year-old. All of them female, assigned at birth. Yes, I'm going to go there because as mine have progressed into adulthood, there have been discussions about gender identity, sexuality, all of those kinds of things. And coming to grips with who we are as human beings adds yet another layer onto the emotional health and well-being. My kids have been through a lot of anxiety and depression driven issues. My middle child has ADHD. There are a lot of things that we've been through getting them to adulthood. And they are quite open. There's nothing that they're willing to say, no, people aren't allowed to publicly know that about me. This is all stuff that they have made, publicly available. I'm not disclosing anybody's, private stuff here. But at the same time, like I said, it would have been interesting and in some ways easier, maybe not, if I had some of these types of mindfulness tools as we progressed through, because there were also family dynamics that got in the way of kind of healthy growth and development, to the point that, me personally, I have depression and anxiety issues as well. A lot of it is externally triggered. For me, I can tell when I'm biochemically slipping into like a little bit of a blue mood or whatever. And all things being equal, I can usually go, okay, something's up. I need to take a moment, make sure that this doesn't progress any further. And I can usually regulate those sorts of things fairly well. A lot of it is usually triggered by external things. COVID made all of my personal care even more difficult. There have been other things. I've had work situations that made all of that infinitely more difficult to deal with. Mm-hmm. And does that make me a bad person or a bad employee? Or I don't think so.
No, and in fact, it probably improves your ability to cope and get through COVID. Because you're aware of it and you're aware of the things that trigger a good mood or trigger a bad mood. There's, I think, a little bit of a misnomer in the word emotional intelligence even. I don't think it's necessarily all an intelligence. There's a lot of scientific studies that can tie a certain personality trait to a way of the ability to regulate your emotions or be aware of your emotions. But a personality trait isn't something I would never necessarily consider an intelligence. They're just individual differences. And when I hear the word emotional intelligence, I think it makes emotional intelligence itself seem on a scale, or somewhat, maybe you're born with it and you can't change it, or maybe even inaccessible to many. If they're like, oh, I'm not intelligent. There's no way I could ever be emotionally intelligent. Conversely, if you think about mindfulness or meditation, we never talk about intelligence. You're not an intelligent meditator. You're not an intelligently mindful person. It's actually a skill. When I think about emotional intelligence, I'd actually love to just come up with a new name for that, because it's a learned skill. And I do believe it's way more tied to awareness. Awareness is directly tied to mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of research about all of the positive benefits of mindfulness. And if you look at emotional intelligence from a mindfulness perspective, it is way more accessible to everyone. As an example, I just told you about the lizard brain in my little children. Mm-hmm. If you can believe it, my younger one, we were already well into the lizard brain as our mode of operation in our family. And he caught me in my lizard brain once. I was, all caught up in some emotion and triggered. And I think he just looked up at me with these just ginormous, big, beautiful eyes and said, "Mommy, are you in your lizard brain?" And I was like, oh my God, you're 2. You just asked me, you just paid attention to my emotional state. And instead of getting involved, or actually the worst for a child is to feel responsible for their parents' emotions. I think therein lies the source of so much psychopathology later in life. But my 2-year-old looked at me and said, "Mommy, are you in your lizard brain?" And I said, that snapped me out of my lizard brain, because I was so delighted that my 2-year-old could understand that kind of a concept.
Mm-hmm.
How can emotional intelligence be anything about intelligence if with the right training and the right level of awareness and support, a 2-year-old can get it?
Right.
That's my point. I think the basis of feelings matter, because if you stop thinking about it as an elusive or inaccessible intelligence or something that you're born with, then if you think about it as your feelings and that they do matter and that you should pay attention to yours and the feelings of others,
Mm-hmm.
then you can move into dealing with emotions from a mindfulness perspective and not worry so much about the intelligence factor.
Next time on Feelings Matter.
Toxic workplace environment is an umbrella statement for there's something going on that's making everyone feel really bad. But we never talk about the feelings part of it. We actually dance across that.
Mm-hmm.
We dance around it. We look at behaviors. We look at policy. We look at regulation.